My name is Alyssa Priest. I am a customer advocate here at LogicManager. My co-host here today is Steven Minsky. He is our founder and CEO of LogicManager. I'm here to talk about taking the guesswork out of everything that you do within your role and ensure that the work that you are doing is seen and heard and understood by leadership. So Steven, can you share a little bit more about kind of your perspective of what does leadership, what do they care about right now?
So I think I want to try to do that from as many different viewpoints as possible, because not many people have worked with boards as I have. And it's interesting, people aren't really also thinking about it. What are they worried about? We all have our own worries. So as risk managers, we're professional warriors in a sense, and this is a board that they have their own concerns. First and foremost for them is they've been very successful in their career, they have reputations, and they have financial assets. When they join a board, they have a fiduciary duty that's not only for the company, but personally. They should materially neglect their duties either for a risk management program or the risk management system and process of which they're accountable for by their being appointed to the board. They could be sued personally by shareholders for their personal assets. This is something that is in the back of their mind all the time. And when they're thinking about their duties, they take them very seriously, and they have very strong BS meters. So they're really looking for the straight shoot. So when people are trying to say, what do I present to the board? It really has to be thinking in 15 minutes. It's 5 minutes for what they need to know, 5 minutes for what they're being asked. You know, what you've done the last time you've seen them, and what is it that you're having on the table as a recommendation for what will be delivered the next board meeting. And this is something they're really concerned with, because they get a board package with tons and tons of information, which they have to read and be accountable for. So think about it as, how can we make that easier and more straightforward to connect what we do in our job with what the board is concerned about, from taking their experiences, and they're not making decisions about the subject matter. They're making decisions on whether the risk has been adequately identified, mitigated, and disclosed. The leadership is supposed to be saying what they want to do and what they don't want to do and what they're, and so forth. It's the board to be saying, has the leadership thought it through? Have they really gone into, at all levels of the organization, ensuring that this risk culture is permeated so that decisions and risks are identified and mitigated at each level all the way down to the front? And that's what the attestation is from leadership. So that part of it is the employee's concern. Have they done their fiduciary duty and meeting the board's expectation? The board has to be able to say, what is that process and who's checked it? How much can I rely on this information being provided? So again, these are two very different viewpoints. And you have internal audit, which is the best friend of risk management. I saw a lot of the word clouds with that, saying, hey, we need to have that, let's say, independence to validate what information has been provided. So I'd say these are just touching on some of the issues. And the world being uncertain just means they're going to be held more liable if something should go wrong. How do they provide evidence they did their job? That really comes back to what is agreed for the next session.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Steven. I mean, that really just hits the nail on the head. The board and leadership, their concern is risk, and make sure they're mitigating their risk, because if they don't, they're held liable, right, for that risk. So what does that mean for me? So what I want to talk a little bit more about is kind of putting this in a real life scenario, right? So let's look at a real life scenario here. Anyone see a problem here? Because obviously in all of our jobs currently. We have a lot of people within our organization, the front lines, that walk around this problem and say, nope, not my job. I'm sure this is important for someone else, but this isn't really something that I need to concern myself about because I'm not in risk. Or we've got these people, these are probably our risk champions. These are the people that say, I see a problem, let me dive in. There's a giant alligator down there. What if that's not the right risk? Maybe we need to do something else first before just diving into this giant hole. Those people didn't do anything about that risk. That's where the negligence piece comes in, or that's where you can get in trouble. I saw a risk or identified a risk, or maybe I didn't even identify a risk and something happened. Now I'm in trouble. We're trying to help you with that. How are you not going to get in trouble piece here at LogicManager. So that's obviously some sort of, very obvious risk that we can see within an organization. But, what about the not so obvious? How do we find these holes? What do we do with them? Steven, can you share a little bit more about that?
You leave your ice on your front walk and delivery person steps on it, hurts themselves. Would it be reasonable that there should have been some melt on that ice? It's on your property in a way that somebody would have been doing their job and expected to come by, and we didn't do it. We're held negligent. And I think this important concept here is, and I put it in here, there's a couple of words that I think are really important. One is reasonable level of care as a reasonable person evaluating it. If we think about it this way, it's a whole lot easier to figure out what our risks are. I know we have a tendency to think policies and controls and control objectives and all that, but when we step back from it in our day-to-day jobs, you have to say, would it be reasonable that somebody would have expected me to look at that and check it? And if the answer is, yeah, that would have been a reasonable expectation of your job. Negligence is not just doing something, it's not doing something, or it's not just not doing something, it's doing something. Either way, what would a reasonable person have done in the same or similar circumstances at that time? So when you think about risk, part of it is bad things do happen to good people. That's not the problem. The problem is when the person or persons or teams or processes, they haven't done what was expected of them to do. They left that vulnerable, and that's where class action lawsuits come in from. And that's where the big risk that we read about is the shareholders are saying, hey, this shouldn't have happened. It was foreseeable 6 months, a year in advance, and you had people who were supposed to be doing this and they didn't do it. It's not the shareholders' fault. Therefore, it's all the way from the leadership down to the front line. Whoever didn't do it is who they're going to want to get their money from. And this is the reality of things. So I think this is something to keep in mind. And then there's a second one, but I first want to stop there and say, listen, you are hearing from people all the time, like, make it real for me. What does it mean in my job? And that's all nice. And we chat about it. Like, what does that mean? 3 layers down that might not even get near the board, or somebody in a governance role that, they're not making that board presentation, or they're not presenting to the auditors. What does it mean to them? I think this, you've had some really cool insights on that.
Yeah, I feel like at the end of the day, people just want to not only do their job, but do their job well. And so I think we can think about these things more so in, if I mitigate these risks, or if I take these risks into consideration, what is that going to do? That's not only going to make sure that I'm, not negligent, that I'm doing what I need to be doing, but also it means that, you're putting yourself out there, that you're doing your best, and that hopefully that will also help you meet your goals. So that was really great insight, Stephen. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I was still thinking about the last question about these days. So
Yeah.
setting goals. So when you're presenting, this is the time of the year with performance reviews and the board setting, leadership setting, and grand bosses and whatnot of setting expectations and goals. And have we looked at our goals and said, can I prove that I know I can tie my control work to the objective? Can a control be effective without having an identified risk? And the answer is no. There's no way. Because if you don't know what the risk is that you're controlling for, there's no way you can determine whether the actual control is doing its job. So that's another way that this shows up on everybody's plate. Say, wow, if you can't connect the objective of what this control is actually the risk of what it's actually controlling for, if you can't nail that in a tight way, it's really subject to we even have any documentation at all. And having some documentation is better than nothing, but if it isn't linked together, then it's showing that, negligent for having bad documentation is just slightly better than negligent for not having any documentation. Yeah. Is there a road that leads to no negligence at all and everything gets taken care of?
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly what I want to take a look at. Let's look at a real life example, a more real life example. Obviously, if an alligator in a hole, can't pass that up. But, you guys shared some roles and responsibilities with us earlier today. So let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at, essentially what are some risks and what can we do to make sure that our work is meaningful and it's making those connections, it's providing evidence, it's all those things that Steven talked about. We've got some really great tools within LogicManager that actually helps with all the things that we're kind of talking about today. One of those things is LogicManager Excerpt. It's our own AI tool that's built within the platform. Manager is trained on risk and all things risk, so it will give you a risk-based answer. We talked about, we can't just have controls in place, right? We also have to have or identify the risk, because why is this control in place if we don't have the risk, right? So we've got a few answers here. There's reputational risk, there's transactional risk, there's a ton of stuff probably recently in the news talking about, how risks are becoming more prevalent where people are getting in through customers' vendors. I know that's been an uptick for us here at LogicManager to be able to help people with their due diligence and make sure they've got controls in place. When you have LogicManager, you have a set framework that you're following with your risk management. You have a proven method. You can see what's going on. You can see, oh, here's my risks, here's my gaps. I don't think we'll be able to get into it today, but there's a completeness checker within essentially all of your risk plans that says, okay, read through my plan, show me where my gaps are, where do I not have controls, where do I not have where are my controls not being tested, right? If a control is in place and it's not being monitored, then what's really going on. So we really stress the importance of having some sort of framework. I know in a lot of other parts of the organization, there's best practices, frameworks. You've got your NIST, your ISOs, your all these different, frameworks that you're using. But what I really don't hear a lot of people talking about is, what framework essentially can I use for risk? And that's a lot of what we want to talk about for the rest of our time. I've come up with this question of, what is a framework essentially that we can use every day in our day-to-day jobs, not just leadership, but also in the front lines to make sure that we are covered, that we're focusing on the right processes, the right procedures, the right things within our jobs to make sure that we're meeting, not only meeting our goals but exceeding our goals, and we're not going to get in trouble. So I love that it popped this up. You guys can see this real time. I didn't no tricks up my sleeves here, but LogicManager actually has a risk maturity model built into all things LogicManager. And actually, Steven is the author of our risk maturity model. So I would love for him to share a little bit more about, what the risk maturity model is and how this can help you moving forward in, building this risk framework.
So what I did here was in 2005, really, when I started the company, people didn't know what risk management was. And it was really overwhelming. And we were following, and really, as we are today, educating on best practices. So I'd like to share one of those best practices, and if you don't mind, see what LMX tells you to do in terms of, all right, if I wanted to know, like on the front line, how do I know if the front line is seeing and managing their risk processes? And maybe you could say in the RMM, in LogicManager software, something of that nature, and just see what would that readiness indicator be in the risk maturity model framework, and say, how would I connect to somebody on the front line to see how much they understand their responsibility there, and how would I use the risk maturity model to reach out to that? And you can take any piece of that you want to, but that's what LMX is doing. It's solving a problem with you as your digital assistant to give you guidance, not just about LogicManager, but about the best practices. And it's the LogicManager University that we've built for this last 20 years, and we put it all into LMX. So we've got the RMM, which I authored, and it's now adopted by the regulators, the states, and everyone else. And now we take it to the next level. So you get this advice and this practical use cases here out of the box.
So it's telling us that there's an accountability indicator within the risk maturity model. And if we focus on those indicators, these are the things that we really should be focusing on. So what I want to do is transition over into the risk maturity model and talk a little bit about that. If you haven't done the RMM, this is your starting point to hopefully help you get a tool if that's something that you're looking for, because this really is a really great benchmarking tool that says, okay, here's where my program is at present day, and here's where I need to get. So you'll be able to have access to this. It's free to take it online. But if you run through this assessment, this is actually exactly what it looks like within the tool. So when you go and take it online, it'll actually bring you into the tool to complete this. So it gives you a little preview of LogicManager. But if we click into any of these indicators, and let me see if I can find actually our accountability one here. Here it is. Woohoo! Let me click on that one, since that's what the one that it said, right? Is our risk management procedures and risk culture understood and embedded at all levels within the organization, right? Our strategic opportunities evaluated on multiple dimensions. That's what this indicator is asking. You get to actually fill out, what are we currently doing? How effective are we at this? You can see exactly, what each of these levels mean. And as you're going through and filling it out, you can give more reasoning to it. Again, this is a super powerful tool to be able to, obviously state what you're doing now, but also to give you that roadmap and framework that says, hey, this is what we're at now, but how do we move us forward? Once you have taken the assessment, you will get a bubble chart like this. As you're going through and taking those different attributes and filling out, what you're currently doing, it's going to be scoring you as you go through the assessment, and it's going to show you your different levels based on all those different attributes. So we have, let me see if I can find it again. Here we go. Risk, culture, and accountability, right? We're right now at initial. So we're doing okay, right? Obviously not at the highest level, but we're not ad hoc and we're not non-existent. So that's really good for us right now. But really the exercise, hopefully we have a couple of minutes here, that I really wanted to do was really, you can pick any of these bubbles. Maybe you're just focusing on the red bubbles right now. So for example, we've got communicating goals here. Maybe management hasn't really said, hey, these are our goals. This is what I want you to focus on. These are the things that matter to me. This is what matters to my boss. And you can actually see how this manifests throughout the whole rest of the bubbles previously. Maybe they don't have any RM program. Maybe, they're not really doing a lot of, there's not a lot of executive support right now. or, we just don't have very good risk planning current state. So you can really use this chart to say, okay, here's where we're at, here's where we're going, here's how I can measure that my work is making an impact. Because if you really do focus on those risks, you focus on, making sure you have proper controls in place, that you have proper documentation, that you're doing, X, Y, and Z processes, that you're really covered. And I know that might seem kind of overwhelming, but really taking it bit by bit and chunk by chunk, and then making those small improvements, I think you're going to see a big difference. But Steven, is there anything you want to kind of add to any of that?
Yeah, I just like to say we did get comments early on in the early years about, hey, make it good looking. We have to stare at this thing all day. And I was surprised that boards feel the same way. But what's really, I think, beyond that is when you click on any one of these bubbles in LogicManager, you get down each layer of the business to be able to show the detail and the evidence that this stuff is true. Some might think, oh, I can do that in a spreadsheet. Sure. But the idea here is, can you drill down, going to the team level, department level, team level, and then down to the individuals and say, show to the board in the risk packet, far-sighted risk management vision, how would I go to demonstrate and provide evidence that I have a proper sampling across my assessments that allow me to make that to be green, and then presenting to the board information classification. This is about creating standards so that the IT group can actually speak to the regular folks who they're serving. Most of the IT risks are outside of IT. They're with everybody on the call today. How do they bridge that gap? And that's your information classification. You've got to bring it down to some standards that everybody can relate to, regardless of what their role, responsibility, level, industry, geography is. So each one of these bubbles has actionable to-do items, and they also have internal audit validations so that when it's presented to the board, as I talked about in the beginning, coming full circle, how do I know I can trust this red is red and this green is green? And then when next time you come and say, I made this bubble from red to yellow, and it takes about 1 year for every full maturity level across the board, that's the evidence that you're going to be able to provide to do that. So I think that's really something we want to think about is, can we take our day-to-day work and then have this produced and put directly into the board packet? Because that's how it was designed, to pull from all the different solutions everywhere throughout the organization and say, this is a representative reality that the board and leadership can discuss. So you want to be going to that and saying, challenging what, from their perspective, is they believe that should be focused on for them to be carrying out their risk responsibilities and fiduciary duties. So I'll throw it out to you there, Alyssa, and say, coming back, how, I know we've got time coming up. We want to get some questions answered here, but the questions I would love to answer is people saying, how do I do that? Any questions that we can have to make this come to what you're facing, because if you're ever asked to contribute to something, you ought to be able to say, well, it doesn't matter if you're boss or grand boss, but how does that get to the board? Because if you can't figure that out, it means that there's others that are also not connected in that chain of information, which means there's gaps, which means there's potentially negligence and bad things that could happen where they're going to say, why wasn't there connection? And why didn't we do something about it? And that's what these colors represent. Not that red is bad and green is good. Just green is what we've done. Yellow is what we're, got works in progress, and red, we really should get to these things if we could have some feedback on priorities. So that's what's important, not whether it's what color it is.
Yeah. And this is showing too, like you're doing work, you're doing something, right? It's not all red, right? So that's a good thing. And I'm sure within your guys' organization, I know that you guys are doing things current state, but what we want to try to help with in LogicManager is that you're creating this proactive approach of, before even problems arise, you're putting the controls in place. You're making sure that the work that you're doing is mitigating your risk. And if you really boil it all down to mitigating your risks and making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and kind of thinking of risks, that's really where this proactive approach is going to come from. And identifying the holes and saying, hey boss, like there's a giant hole over here, what do you want me to do with it? Oh, good thing I've already thought about this and here's what I want to do to fix it. And they're going to jump in and say, oh my gosh, yes, please fix it. Here's the money, here's the resources, here's what you need to make it go away. Because that's, I think Steven can maybe agree with that, of like, that's all the board wants, right? Is how do you make it go away? Like, it's not enough to just bring up a problem, but say, here's your options to fix it. What do you want to do? And that's essentially what risk management is doing. So anything you want to kind of add there, Steven?
And prove that it's done. The evidence, how do you prove it? It's easy to say it, just how do you prove it? And how, more importantly, if it came up as an issue and it's going to be a liability, how can they say they actually not only can prove it, but that internal audit can validate that in fact that's exactly what had happened in the process, and that's the process it went through and didn't skip steps and cut corners. So all of that has to be really simple, by the way. The auditor asks, what is it you're doing? And where's your documentation for what you say you're doing? And then they observe some folks doing it and see if it matches up with the documentation and what leadership said they expect to be happening. Anything that's a gap between any of those three very simple statements, that's called exposure to negligence, because that's not what was said. So that's really the key, is not so much what's said, but that you can prove that you're actually doing it. That's where risk management is real. As an assignment, say, go to riskmaturityModel.org.
Yeah.
That's our public website of rising tide floats all boats, and say, I put our intellectual property online there for folks to be able to do this and prepare their board reports, and LogicManager software is there to be able to help you in the free version. Give it a try and see how it goes for you. And if you have any questions about it, really love to see some engagement on it. And that's what we're hoping to do for people for today.
So I definitely encourage you guys to take the RMM if you haven't, because this is really going to be your roadmap to, what's next or what should we focus on. And I want to take a little bit of a practical example here. So for example, if we're in the red right now for communicating goals, I can go into LMX and say, oops, could type that in, definitely. I am at Ad Hoc for communicating goals. How do I get to initial on the RMM? What step? Let's just start there. See where we go. Okay, so we will need to establish a baseline framework. We need to document our goals. We need to identify who the stakeholders are. We need to develop communication channels, and then, away we go. But, how do I do this in LogicManager? There we go. So we need to create a new RMM plan, document our goals, assign responsibilities. And you can really take any of these and drill in on these and say, how do I create an RMM plan in LogicManager? You can drill down and down and down and down and figure this out. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys to see the roadmap for your roles. And I'm excited to see you guys put this stuff into action, and stay tuned for our next webinar. Thanks, guys.